The timer above the galley door read 41 minutes when the third sous chef quit. Kale Marrow heard the crash from the prep station where he'd been julienning starfruit, the Velthani equivalent, anyway, a pale root vegetable that bled violet when cut, and he looked up just in time to watch Chef Torin tear off his apron and throw it at the head steward's feet. The steward, a tall Velthani woman in a silver sash, didn't flinch. She'd seen this twice already today. "The broth rejects every binding agent we have," Torin said, his voice cracking. "It separates, it clots, it turns to chalk on the tongue, and the girl won't eat anything else." He jabbed a finger at the pot on the central burner where a grayish film had already formed on the surface. "Find someone who can make 70-year-old bone stock sing for a child who's been starving herself for 9 days. It won't be me." He walked out. The door swung shut behind him. The timer ticked to 40 minutes. Kale set down his knife. Around him, the palace kitchen of the Velthani sovereignty hummed with the low panic of a staff that had run out of ideas. 12 cooks remained at their stations, Velthani, mostly, with skin the color of pearl and eyes like wet amber, and not one of them looked at the central burner. The pot sat there like something cursed. 9 days. That was how long the queen's daughter had refused food. Not water. The girl drank water when it was placed before her, though she wouldn't reach for it herself. But every dish that left this kitchen came back untouched. Broths, pastes, nutrient foams, medically calibrated caloric suspensions that the royal physicians had designed molecule by molecule. All of it returned on silver trays with the seals unbroken. The princess was 6 years old. Kale had been on this station for 11 weeks. Human line cook, lowest tier of the palace kitchen's hierarchy, brought aboard because the sovereignty's cultural exchange program required 1 alien worker per royal household division, and the kitchen had drawn the short lot. He prepped vegetables. He cleaned grills. He hauled stock pots to the wash bay and scrubbed them until the copper lining showed. The Velthani cooks didn't speak to him unless they needed something carried, and the head steward, her name was Prefect Dinny, addressed him by station number, not name. "Station 14. He answered to it without complaint. He knew what the broth was. He'd been watching them fail at it for 3 days. The Velthani had a ceremonial stock called Velharath, a slow-rendered bone broth made from the marrow of a particular grazing animal native to the highland plateaus of their homeworld. It was the first food given to Velthani children when they transitioned from milk, a kind of sacred starter, and for some children, particularly those in crisis, those who had shut down, it was the only food that could coax the body back into accepting nourishment. The physicians had flagged it. The girl's own mother, Queen Valith, had requested it specifically. It was supposed to be the answer. But the stock wouldn't hold. Something in the marrow, an enzyme unique to the Velthani animal, destabilized every time the broth crossed a certain temperature threshold. The binding agents the chefs used, plant gums, mineral salts, protein isolates, either killed the flavor or turned the texture to paste. 3 sous chefs had tried. 3 had produced something that looked right but tasted like wet chalk. The girl, whose name Kale had learned only by listening, was called Ciel. She had tasted the first attempt and pushed it away with both hands. She hadn't been offered the other 2. No one wanted to waste what little willingness she had left. The timer read 38 minutes. That was when the next tray was due in the princess's chamber. Kale wiped his hands on his apron. He looked at the pot. He looked at the 11 remaining cooks, all of them pointedly not looking at it. He looked at Prefect Dinny, who was standing by the door with her arms crossed, her silver sash perfectly straight, her face the color of old bone. He walked to the central burner. "Station 14, Dinny's voice was flat. "Return to your prep station." "I know what's wrong with it," Kale said. The kitchen went quiet. Not the polite quiet of deference, the hard quiet of disbelief. A human line cook, the lowest-ranked worker in the room, had just spoken to the prefect without being addressed. 2 of the Velthani cooks exchanged a glance that Kale didn't need to translate. You are not qualified to work the central burner, Denny said. Your certification covers vegetable preparation and sanitation. The enzyme is heat labile, Kale said. He kept his voice even, not challenging, not pleading, just stating it the way he'd state the temperature of an oven. It denatures above 62 degrees. Your chefs have been simmering at 80. That's why the stock separates. It's not a binding problem, it's a temperature problem. Denny stared at him. Her amber eyes didn't blink. Velthani blinked less than humans, something that had unnerved him in his first week and now just felt normal. And how, she said, would a human vegetable cook know the denaturation threshold of Velharath marrow enzyme? Because I've been cleaning the stock pots for 3 days, Kale said. The residue tells you everything. When the enzyme holds, the film on the pot wall is translucent. When it breaks, it's chalky. The pots that were pulled off the heat early before the simmer hit full boil had translucent residue. The rest had chalk. He paused. I've been a line cook for 12 years. You learn to read what the pot leaves behind. The timer read 36 minutes. Denny didn't answer immediately. Behind her, through the serving corridor, Kale could hear the faint sound of the palace's inner chamber's distant footsteps, a murmured conversation, the hush that had settled over the entire household since the princess had stopped eating. The physicians had briefed the kitchen staff that morning. 9 days without solid food. A Velthani child's metabolism was more resilient than a human's, but not infinitely. The window was narrowing. Show me, Denny said. Kale didn't waste the opening. He moved to the cold storage alcove and pulled out a fresh marrow canister, the raw bones, split and packed in mineral oil to prevent oxidation. He selected 3 femur sections, dense and heavy, the marrow inside them a pale rose color that meant they hadn't been sitting long. Then he went to the central burner and adjusted the flame. The Velthani used radiant heat elements, not open flame, but the principle was the same. He dialed the element down to its lowest sustained setting, a temperature that would make any trained Velthani chef grimace, because it was barely above warming. Too low to render stock by their training, too gentle to extract anything from bone. That temperature will take hours, one of the cooks said. A man named Orath, who had been the second sous chef to quit and had apparently reconsidered. He was standing at the edge of the central station, arms folded, watching with the expression of someone observing a traffic accident. 40 minutes, Kale said, if I do it right. He set a clean pot on the element. Added cold water, mineral balanced, the same water the kitchen used for everything, drawn from the palace's aquifer. Then the marrow sections, cracked but not crushed, placed gently so they wouldn't splinter. No salt, no aromatics, nothing that would compete with the enzyme. Then he waited. The kitchen watched him wait. It was, Kale knew, the hardest part to justify to cooks trained in the Velthani tradition, where stock making was an aggressive process, high heat, rapid extraction, layered with mineral salts and plant binders to stabilize the proteins. Human stock making was different. Not better, not worse, but different in one critical way: patience at low temperature. A human grandmother's bone broth, the real kind, the kind Kale's own mother had made in a dented pot on a gas stove in the back of a restaurant in Meridian City, relied on time and gentleness. You coaxed the flavor out. You didn't rip it. At the 8-minute mark, the first wisps of steam began to rise from the surface. Kale watched the color of the water. It was shifting from clear to the faintest blush of gold, the marrow releasing its first oils, slow and willing, unforced. No binding agent, Orath asked. The enzyme is the binding agent, Kale said. If you don't kill it, it does the work itself. It's a natural emulsifier. It holds the fat in suspension, keeps the proteins from clumping. The animal evolved that way. The marrow is designed to be digestible. Your chefs were solving a problem that doesn't exist if you just leave the heat alone. Orath's expression shifted. Not quite belief. Something adjacent to it, the look of a professional encountering an idea that was simultaneously obvious and infuriating. At the 15-minute mark, Cale used a shallow ladle to skim the surface. A thin layer of impurity, gray, fibrous, lifted away cleanly. Beneath it, the stock was golden. Not the dull khaki of the failed attempts, but a true, warm gold, the color of late afternoon light through a window. He lowered his face to the steam and inhaled. It smelled like something alive. Rich, clean, faintly sweet, the smell of marrow doing what marrow was supposed to do. "I need a tasting spoon," he said. Someone handed him one. He dipped it, blew across the surface, and tasted. The flavor was round, deep, and impossibly smooth, no chalk, no grain, no bitterness. It coated the tongue the way a good stock should, with a warmth that lingered after you swallowed. He'd tasted plenty of stocks in his life. This was among the finest. "Prefect," he said, "it's ready to strain." Dinny crossed the kitchen in 4 strides. She took the spoon from his hand, dipped it herself, and tasted. Her eyes closed. For 3 full seconds, the prefect of the Queen's kitchen, a woman who ran a staff of 60 and answered directly to the throne, stood with her eyes shut and her lips pressed together, and Cale could see the moment the taste registered because her jaw unclenched. It was a small thing. No one else would have noticed. She opened her eyes. "Strain it," she said. "Use the silk filter, not the mesh." Cale strained the stock through the silk cloth, watching the liquid pour clear and golden into the serving vessel. 23 minutes had passed since he'd started. The timer above the door read 13 minutes until the tray was due. He filled a small bowl, the child-sized one, pale blue ceramic, the one the kitchen used for the princess's meals. He set it on the tray. No garnish, no decoration, just the broth steaming gently, golden. "I'll carry it," Dinny said. "Let me," Cale said. She looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes, not suspicion exactly, and not permission. Assessment. She was calculating, in the way that career servants do, whether this human's involvement would complicate or simplify the situation that waited at the end of the corridor. "The girl hasn't eaten in 9 days, Dinny said. "She's frightened. She doesn't know you." "She doesn't know the broth either," Cale said. "But she'll know what it smells like. Children always do." The timer read 11 minutes. Dinny picked up the tray herself, but she nodded toward the door. Cale wiped his hands, removed his apron, and followed her. The palace corridors of the Velthani sovereignty were not what Cale had expected when he'd first arrived. He'd imagined crystal and light, the postcard version of alien royalty that the cultural exchange brochures sold to human recruits. What he'd found instead was stone. Pale, warm stone, the color of sandstone in morning light, with veins of something luminous threaded through it, not glowing exactly, but catching ambient light and holding it, so the hallways were never dark but never bright. It was like walking through the inside of a shell. Dinny walked ahead of him, tray balanced on one palm with the practiced ease of someone who had carried 10,000 trays down 10,000 hallways. She didn't speak. Cale didn't try to fill the silence. He'd learned, in 11 weeks of watching the Velthani operate, that they valued quiet the way humans valued eye contact, as a form of respect. They passed 2 guards at the intersection of the residential wing. The guards were tall, armored in a pale composite that matched the stone, and they looked at Cale with the flat incuriosity that palace guards reserved for staff. One of them murmured something to Dinny in formal Velthani. She answered in 2 words. The guard's eyes moved to Cale, lingered, and moved away. The princess's chamber was at the end of the corridor. The door was open, propped, Cale realized, because the girl's attending physician wanted to be able to hear her from the monitoring station in the antechamber. As they approached, Cale could see the antechamber first, a low-ceilinged room lined with medical readouts, 2 physician attendants in pale gray, and a woman standing at the window with her back to the door. The woman was Queen Valeth. Cale had seen her once before, at the orientation ceremony when he'd first arrived. She was tall, even for a Velthani nearly 2 meters with skin the color of moonstone and hair that fell in a straight silver-white curtain past her shoulders. Her eyes, when she turned, were the palest violet Kale had ever seen, almost white, with pupils that contracted in the light like a cat's. She was beautiful in the way that mountains are beautiful, not inviting, not warm, but undeniable. She looked at the tray, then at Kale. "Who is this?" she said. Her voice was low, controlled, and absolutely empty of inflection. "Station 14, Majesty," Dinny said. "The human line cook. He prepared this stock." The human. The Queen's gaze settled on Kale the way light settles on an object it has no interest in illuminating. "The vegetable cook." "Yes, Majesty." 3 of my sous chefs trained in the Royal Academy, certified in Velharath preparation, each with more than 40 years of service, produced inedible stock. And you are presenting me with the work of a human vegetable cook. It wasn't a question. It was an observation offered in the tone of someone cataloging a mistake before it was made. "The stock is viable, Majesty," Dinny said. "I tasted it myself." The Queen looked at the tray again. Her expression didn't change, but she stepped aside. The princess's room was smaller than Kale had expected for the daughter of a sovereign. A bed, low and wide, with pale linens. A window that looked out over the palace gardens, where the light was the soft blue gold of a Velthani afternoon. Medical monitoring equipment, discreet but present, built into the wall beside the headboard. And sitting in the center of the bed, propped against a pillow that was larger than she was, a girl. Ciel was small. Even for 6, she was small, thin-limbed, her skin the same moonstone as her mother's but with a translucency that spoke of illness, of a body running on reserves it was quickly exhausting. Her hair was silver-white, like the Queen's, but limp, lacking the luminous quality that healthy Velthani hair carried. Her eyes were open. They were violet like her mother's, but darker, bruised-looking, ringed with the faint shadows of a child who wasn't sleeping well. She looked at Dinny, then at the tray, then at Kale. Kale had been around enough children, human children, working kitchens where the owner's kids ran underfoot, feeding his sister's 3 boys on weekends when she worked doubles, to recognize the expression on Ciel's face. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. The particular, heavy-lidded exhaustion of a small person who had been offered things by adults too many times and had learned that the offerings never helped. Dinny set the tray on the bedside table. The bowl sat there, steaming gently. The gold of the broth caught the windowlight and threw a warm reflection onto the pale blue ceramic. Nobody spoke. The physicians watched from the antechamber. The Queen stood by the wall with her arms at her sides, her posture so controlled it looked carved. Dinny stepped back. Kale did something that, in hindsight, probably violated 6 different protocols of the Velthani royal household. He sat down on the floor next to the bed. Not on the bed, not on a chair, on the floor, cross-legged so that his head was level with Ciel's. He folded his hands in his lap. He didn't reach for the bowl. He didn't offer it. He just sat there, close enough that the girl could see his face without having to look up. "It's hot," he said. His Velthani was basic, functional, not elegant, the kind of vocabulary you picked up from 11 weeks of kitchen work, but it was enough. "You should let it cool a little." Ciel looked at him. Her violet eyes, enormous in her thin face, studied him with the grave intensity that children reserve for things they haven't decided about yet. She didn't speak. Kale waited. He could feel the Queen's gaze on the back of his neck like a physical weight. He could hear one of the physicians shifting in the antechamber, and the faint rustle of Dinny's sash as she breathed. The room smelled like the broth, warm, clean, alive. After a while, 20 seconds maybe, though it felt longer, Ciel's eyes moved from his face to the bowl. Her nostrils flared. A tiny motion, involuntary, the body responding to what the mind hadn't agreed to yet. "My mom used to make something like this," Kale said. He wasn't performing. He wasn't strategizing. He was talking because the silence felt like pressure, and he knew, from years of feeding reluctant children, that sometimes a voice was a bridge. Not the same. Different animal, different planet. But the smell was the same. She said you could tell a good stock by whether it made the kitchen feel warmer just by being there. Ciel's hand moved. It was a small motion, her fingers uncurling from the blanket, reaching toward the bedside table. Not toward the bowl, toward the edge of the tray, where a faint curl of steam was rising. She touched the steam with her fingertips, felt its warmth. Then she pulled the tray closer. Cale didn't move, didn't smile, didn't encourage. He sat on the floor and watched the garden through the window and let the girl make her own choice in her own time. Behind him, the queen had not moved. He could hear her breathing, or rather, he could hear the moments between her breaths, the pauses that were too long, too controlled, the breathing of someone holding themselves together by force of will. Ciel picked up the bowl with both hands. She brought it to her face, inhaled. Her eyes closed, and for a moment the exhaustion in her expression loosened, not gone, but eased, the way a fist eases when something warm is placed inside it. She drank. Not a sip, not a tentative taste. She tipped the bowl to her lips and drank, and the golden broth disappeared in long, steady swallows, the way a child drinks when their body has been waiting for something it recognizes. Her throat moved. Her hands, wrapped around the ceramic, tightened. When the bowl was empty, she lowered it to her lap and sat very still, and her eyes opened, and they were wet. One of the physicians in the antechamber made a sound, a short, bitten-off exhalation, the kind of noise a professional makes when the data does something they'd stopped expecting. Ciel looked at Cale. "More," she said. Her voice was small and rough, the voice of someone who hadn't used it much lately. "Please." Cale looked at Dinny. Dinny looked at the queen. Queen Valeth had not moved from her position by the wall. Her posture was still controlled, still carved, still sovereign. But her eyes, those pale violet eyes that had looked at Cale in the antechamber with the flat assessment of a ruler evaluating an irrelevant piece of machinery, were changed. Not soft, exactly. Velthani royalty didn't do soft, not in front of staff, not in front of physicians, not in front of humans. But there was something behind the control now. Something that looked, if you knew how to read it, like the moment a held breath is finally released. She nodded once. Cale stood up. "I'll need 20 minutes, he said. He walked back to the kitchen alone. Dinny stayed with the queen. The corridors were the same pale stone, threaded luminescence, the shell-like warmth of a palace that had stood for centuries, but they felt different now. The way a place feels different after you've done something that mattered in it. His hands smelled like marrow and mineral water. In the kitchen, the staff was waiting, not pretending to work, not busying themselves with other tasks. Waiting. 12 Velthani cooks standing at their stations looking at him as he walked through the door. Oreth spoke first. "Did she eat?" "She drank the whole bowl," Cale said. "She asked for more." Nobody cheered. Nobody clapped. The Velthani didn't celebrate that way. But something changed in the room, a tension that had been there for 9 days, a pressure that had sat on the kitchen like weather, shifted. Cale saw it in the way Oreth's shoulders dropped a quarter inch, in the way one of the pastry cooks pressed her fingertips to the edge of her station and closed her eyes, in the way the dishwasher, a young Velthani man who'd been wringing the same towel for an hour, set it down. Cale went back to the central burner. Fresh bones, clean pot, cold water, low heat. He cracked the marrow sections and placed them gently, the same way he'd done it the first time, and he settled in to wait. While the stock rendered, Oreth came to stand beside him, not speaking. Just present, in the way the Velthani stood beside someone when they wanted to convey something that words would overcomplicate. After a few minutes, Oreth reached over and adjusted the silk straining cloth, folding it into the precise configuration that produced the clearest pour. He didn't explain. He just did it and then stepped back. The second bowl went up 17 minutes later. Dinny came down to collect it herself this time, and when she took the tray from Kale's hands, she said something he didn't immediately understand, a Velthani phrase he hadn't learned, spoken quickly and quietly, the way someone speaks when they're not sure they want to be heard. He looked it up later, on the language module in his quarters. It meant roughly, "The kitchen sees you." The third bowl went up an hour after that, and this time, the request came not from Dinny but from one of the physicians. The girl had eaten twice and was asking for a third serving. Her vitals were stabilizing. Her body temperature, which had been dropping for 3 days, had risen half a degree. The physician, an older Velthani woman with steel-gray hair and the no-nonsense bearing of someone who had treated royalty for decades, looked at Kale with an expression that was difficult to classify. Not warmth, not gratitude, something closer to professional reassessment, the look a specialist gives when she realizes the solution came from outside her specialty. "What is the temperature of the stock when it reaches the bowl?" the physician asked. 58 degrees, Kale said. "At the point of service, it drops to 54 by the time she drinks it." 58, the physician wrote it down. "Our preparations were served at 72. 72 kills the enzyme," Kale said. "And it's too hot for a child's mouth. She would have had to wait, and waiting is the last thing a frightened child wants to do with food." The physician looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once and left. The rest of that day passed in the particular rhythm that Kale knew from every kitchen he'd ever worked, in the rhythm of a room that has found its center. He made 4 more bowls of stock for the princess. Each one was identical: cold water, fresh marrow, low heat, 20 minutes silk strain. Each one came back empty. By the 6th bowl, CL had eaten enough that the physicians upgraded her status from critical to stable monitoring. By evening, she was sleeping real sleep, the physician said, not the fitful half-consciousness she'd been drifting in for days. Kale cleaned the central burner at the end of his shift. He scrubbed the pot, hung the silk cloth to dry, and returned the unused marrow to cold storage. Around him, the kitchen was shutting down for the night, the sounds of equipment being wiped, burners being capped, the low murmur of staff changing over. He hung his apron on the hook marked 14 and started for the door. "Marrow." He stopped. It was Dinny's voice, but the word she'd used was his name, not Station 14, his name. She was standing by the serving corridor, her silver sash slightly askew for the first time since he'd known her, the kind of small disorder that meant a long day, real fatigue, the mask slipping just enough to show the person behind it. "The Queen has asked to speak with you," she said. "Tomorrow morning, the garden terrace before first meal." Kale nodded. "All right." "She doesn't do this," Dinny added. Her voice was quiet. "Speak with kitchen staff in the garden. That is not something she does." "Understood," Kale said. He went back to his quarters, a small room in the staff wing, clean and plain, with a window that looked out over the lower terraces. He didn't sleep well. Not from anxiety, he wasn't anxious exactly, and the emotion he felt wasn't close enough to any single word to name easily. He lay on his back and looked at the ceiling and thought about his mother's kitchen, the dented pot, the gas stove, the stock that simmered for hours while the restaurant hummed around it. She taught him the principle when he was 14. You don't force the flavor out. You ask for it. And if you ask right, it gives you everything. The garden terrace in the morning was a place Kale hadn't been before. Staff didn't come here. It was a private space open to the sky, which was the soft indigo of a Velthani dawn, with a railing of carved stone overlooking a descent of tiered gardens that fell away toward the river valley below. The stone underfoot was the same warm pale as the corridors, but worn smooth by centuries of feet, and the luminous veins in it caught the dawn light and glowed faintly, like embers in ash. Queen Valith was standing at the railing when he arrived. She was dressed simply by royal standards, at least. No crown, no ceremonial sash, a long coat of pale silver fabric that moved in the morning air like water. Her hair was unbound, and the dawn light turned it from silver white to something warmer, almost gold. She looked smaller out here, away from the chamber with its medical readouts and its hovering physicians. She looked like a mother. "You are the cook," she said without turning. "I am, Majesty." "Denny tells me you learned the enzyme threshold from cleaning residue off stock pots." "Yes." 3 chefs with advanced certifications in Velharath preparation did not observe what you observed. She turned then and looked at him. The dawn light caught the violet of her eyes and lit them from within. Why? Kale thought about it. Not because the answer was complicated, but because the question deserved more than his first instinct, which was to shrug and say something about paying attention. "Because they were looking at the recipe," he said. "I was looking at the pot." The Queen was silent for a moment. The wind moved across the terrace, carrying the smell of the gardens below, something floral, faintly citrus, mixed with the mineral scent of the stone. "My daughter ate 7 servings yesterday," she said. "The physicians tell me her body has begun to recover." They credit the Velharath. "It's good stock," Kale said. "The marrow you source is excellent." "Credit the Velharath," the Queen repeated. "But I do not think the Velharath is the whole of it. I watched you sit on the floor of my daughter's room. I watched you talk to her about your mother's kitchen while she decided whether to eat. You did not push. You did not perform. You sat and you waited and you talked about something real." She paused. "My physicians have been offering her food as a medical intervention for 9 days. You offered it as something a person does when they care about another person." Kale didn't have a response to that, so he didn't offer one. He stood on the terrace and let the silence hold, the way the Velthani did, the way he'd learned. "I would like to appoint you as Ciel's personal dietary attendant," the Queen said. "A new position. You would oversee all of her meals, prepared by your methods, with full access to the royal kitchen's resources. The title carries a court rank equivalent to 3rd physician. Your quarters would be relocated to the residential wing. Your compensation would be adjusted accordingly." She said it the way she said everything, controlled, measured, the words laid down like stones in a wall. But beneath the control, Kale heard something else. Not a command. An ask. The particular ask of someone who had spent 9 days watching their child starve and had run out of solutions until a vegetable cook sat on the floor and offered a bowl of broth. Kale looked out at the gardens. The tiered terraces descended into the valley in precise, beautiful lines, every plant placed with intention, every stone carved with care, a landscape that had been designed by people who understood that beauty was a form of order. It was the most extraordinary place he'd ever stood. "Majesty," he said, "I'm grateful, but I'd like to stay on the line." The Queen's expression didn't change, but her stillness sharpened the stillness of someone who has heard something unexpected and is processing it before responding. "You are declining," she said. "I'm declining the title," Kale said, "and the quarters and the rank, but I'll make the stock. Every day as long as she needs it. You don't need to move me to the residential wing for that. I can make it from Station 14. You would continue as a vegetable cook." "I'm a line cook, Majesty. It's what I am. I don't need a title to make good stock." He paused. "And Ciel doesn't need a dietary attendant. She needs someone in the kitchen who knows what the pot is telling him. I can do that from where I am." The Queen looked at him for a long time. The dawn light moved across the terrace as the sun climbed, shifting the shadows, warming the stone. In the valley below, something was singing a bird, or this world's equivalent, a clear tone that rose and fell like breathing. "You are an unusual man, Marrow," the Queen said. "I'm a cook," Kale said. The Queen turned back to the railing. The conversation, Kale understood, was over. He had not been dismissed. She would have said a word for that, a formal closing that even he would recognize, but the silence was a release, a permission to leave. He inclined his head, though she wasn't looking, and turned toward the door. He was 3 steps away when she spoke again. "Kale." His first name, not Marrow, not Station 14, Not the human or the cook or the vegetable worker. His name spoken in the Queen's precise, controlled voice, but with something underneath it, something that was not royal, not sovereign, not a queen's voice at all, but a mother's. "Yes, Majesty." "Thank you." He nodded, walked through the door, down the corridor, past the guards who didn't look at him, past the monitoring station where the night physician was reviewing the princess's latest readings, past the antechamber where a tray was being prepared for the morning meal. In the kitchen, the day shift was starting up. Broth was at the central station, calibrating the elements. The pastry cook was rolling dough. The dishwasher was sorting clean towels. The sounds were ordinary, the clatter and hum of a working kitchen, the rhythm that Kale had known his whole adult life in one form or another, on one world or another. He put on his apron, took his position at Station 14, picked up his knife. The morning's prep list was waiting. Starfruit for the luncheon, root vegetables for the evening soup, a case of something called thaura that needed to be peeled and sectioned before noon. He started with the starfruit, the pale roots that bled violet, cutting them into precise, even pieces the way he'd been trained, the way he'd done 10,000 times. But before he started the prep list, he set a clean pot on the small auxiliary burner at his station. Cold water, fresh marrow, low heat, the stock for CL's breakfast. Broth glanced over, saw what he was doing, said nothing. But he reached across and adjusted the flame a quarter turn lower, a correction so small it barely mattered, but Kale understood what it meant. It meant, "I'm paying attention to what you taught me." It meant, "The kitchen learned something yesterday." Kale nodded. The stock began its slow, patient work. Over the next 3 weeks the princess ate. Not just the Velharath, though that remained the anchor, the thing she reached for first, the taste that told her body it was safe to be hungry. Gradually, carefully, Kale introduced other foods alongside the broth. A soft grain porridge, cooked the same way, low heat, patient stirring, no rushing. Steamed root vegetables, the ones he prepped every day at Station 14, cut thin enough for a child's mouth, and seasoned with nothing but a whisper of the mineral salt the Velthani used in everything. A paste of mashed fruit that he prepared by hand, pressing it through the silk cloth to remove every seed and fiber, so the texture was smooth enough that it couldn't startle a mouth that was still relearning what food felt like. Each meal went up on the tray with the same simplicity. One bowl, no garnish, no performance, just food made with attention, served at the right temperature, offered without pressure. CL ate it, not always all of it, not always quickly, but she ate, and her body responded the way a child's body does when it's given what it needs, with steady, uncomplicated recovery. Kale continued to work Station 14. He prepped vegetables, he cleaned grills, he hauled stock pots and scrubbed copper. The only change to his routine was the auxiliary burner, where a pot of Velharath stock rendered every morning, every afternoon, and every evening, timed to the princess's meal schedule. Broth, without being asked, began sourcing the marrow specifically for Kale, selecting the freshest cuts, storing them in a dedicated cold storage alcove that he labeled with a small mark in Velthani script that Kale couldn't read but later learned meant, "for the child." The rest of the kitchen adjusted around the new reality without discussion. The pastry cook began leaving a small portion of her morning dough unflavored, unsweetened, rolled thin beside Kale's station, in case the princess graduated to bread. The sauce cook offered the use of her temperature-controlled serving vessels, which kept liquids within a half-degree of their set point during transport. The dishwasher washed the princess's blue ceramic bowl by hand, separately, with the same care he'd give ceremonial ware. Nobody talked about it. Nobody called it anything. It was just what the kitchen did. Denny began using his name. Not always in formal settings in front of visiting dignitaries, he was still Station 14. But in the kitchen, in the early morning before the full shift arrived, when she reviewed the day's menu with the lead cooks and Kale was at his station prepping starfruit, she called him Marrow. Once, She called him Kale. She corrected herself immediately, but the correction came with a small, tight-lipped expression that might, in another species, have been the beginning of a smile. The queen did not summon him again. He didn't expect her to. What had passed on the garden terrace was complete, a transaction of gratitude and refusal that both of them understood, and that neither of them needed to revisit. But twice, in the weeks that followed, Kale saw her. Once in the corridor outside the kitchen, where she was walking with a delegation of trade officials, and her eyes passed over him without stopping, but her step slowed. Fractionally, the way a person's step slows when they pass a door behind which something important once happened. And once in the garden itself, where Kale had been sent to collect herbs for the evening meal, and the queen was walking with Ciel. The girl was on her feet. She was walking. She was holding her mother's hand with one hand and carrying a small stone in the other, a garden stone, smooth and pale, the kind of thing a 6-year-old picks up because it looks interesting. Her silver-white hair was clean and combed, and it had regained some of its luminosity, a faint, pearly sheen that caught the light as she moved. She was still thin, still small, but the translucency of illness was gone from her skin. She looked like a child. Just a child, walking in a garden with her mother holding a rock. She saw Kale. Her eyes, violet clear, no longer bruised with shadows, found him across the garden, and she stopped walking. She didn't wave, didn't call out. She looked at him the way children look at someone they associate with a particular feeling, not a name, not a role, not a title, but a feeling. Warmth, safety, the smell of good stock on a frightened afternoon. Then she held up the stone, showing it to him, the way a child shows a treasure to someone they trust. Kale raised his hand. A small wave, the kind you give across a room, understated, easy. The girl turned back to her mother and they walked on, and Kale knelt among the herb beds and gathered rosemary, and the sun was warm, and the garden smelled like every good kitchen he'd ever known, and he was a line cook, and that was enough. In the kitchen that evening he made the stock, the same way, cold water, fresh marrow, low heat, 20 minutes, silk strain. Station 14, every day. It was enough.